I want to say at the top of this, I am a yoga teacher, not a Sanskrit teacher. I'm here to talk about the 8 limbs, and I'm going to explain them using minimal use of Sanskrit. They're a way of living with intention, step by step. The first limb is called Yama, and you can think of it as restraint or moral discipline. It's absolutely foundational. Patanjali offered 5 ways to practice it. Nonviolence, and that's not only in what we do, but in how we speak. Truth, when our thoughts, our words, and our actions line up, and we don't have to keep editing ourselves. Non-stealing. That doesn't apply just to objects, but that's with time, attention, other people's energy. Moderation. Don't consider these acts of repression, but as proper channeling of what actually fuels us. And then, of course, non-grasping or letting go. And that can be from grudges to things that we no longer need, stories that we've outgrown. And we take these things on willingly. They're not punishments. They're ways of clearing and quieting the noise so we can finally hear what's real and what really matters. Patanjali says yoga is the settling of the fluctuations of the mind. And it is with the first limb that settling truly begins. If the first limb of yoga asks how we live with the world, then the second asks how we live with ourselves. And this limb is called Niyama. And it's not about behavior that we perfect for others, but it's about the inner habits we cultivate quietly day by day. So Niyama turns the practice inward, and it asks us how we tend the inner ground where everything else grows. Patanjali describes 5 ways that we can show up for this. And the first is cleanliness. And that's not perfection, but that's caring for the areas we inhabit, our bodies, our space, our mind. And then contentment. And that's learning to be at ease with what is here without needing to ask life to rearrange itself before we're okay. And then, steadfast effort, showing up again and again, even when motivation fades and even when progress feels very slow. Self-study. And this is not to critique or to be judgmental of self, but to ask, what is really going on with me right now? And then, of course, devotion. Because not everything depends on ego. And allowing ourselves to be guided by something larger than our preferences is a way that we can show that devotion. So Niyama is not about fixing ourselves, but having workable relationships with our inner life. And when that relationship is cared for, the practice of yoga has somewhere to land. As Patanjali says, and let me paraphrase, discipline, self-study, and devotion are the practice of yoga. So this is truly how the inner work begins with Niyama, and it's very quiet, and it's very patient, and it happens from the inside out. So by the time we reach the third limb of yoga, we've already done some of the work. We've looked at how we live with others. We've looked at how we live with ourselves. And we haven't even begun the physical practice, per se. That's when Patanjali turns to the body. And he calls this limb Asana. So today, asana is what we consider yoga, and that's the poses, the sequence, the movement. But in Yoga Sutras, asana is a very specific role. And Patanjali defines it simply as a posture that steadies and is comfortable. It's not impressive, it's not extreme. And the question isn't for him how much the body can do, it's whether the body can be still without demanding constant attention. Asana is about reducing physical distraction, the fidgeting, the strain, the urge to escape discomfort. So when the body is steady and at ease, it stops pulling the mind outward, and attention becomes available. And that's really the point. Strength and flexibility and health may come, but they're side effects. That's not the actual goal. Asana prepares the body so it does not disturb the mind. As Patanjali says posture should be steady and comfortable. So, that's the work of the third limb, a body that can stay so the practice can go deeper. It's not more complicated than that. Okay, so once the body can stay, Patanjali turns to the breath. And this limb is called Pranayama. And it's very often translated as breath control, but that can be misleading because it is certainly not about forcing the breath or making it into something dramatic. Pranayama is about refinement. The breath is the meeting place of the body and the mind. So you can think of it this way. When the breath is agitated, the mind follows. And when the breath steadies, the mind begins to settle. Patanjali places pranayama after asana for a reason. You see, if the body's restless, the breath will be too. And so follows the mind. So again, this is not a specialty breathing situation. It is a noticing of the inhale and the pause that follows, the release of the breath, the exhale, and there's quiet spaces in between. It's like a noticing, an attention as the breath moves and the rest comes and the nervous system begins to soften and the mind grows less reactive. I wouldn't consider it about like, I've got to breathe better, but less scattered. Patanjali tells us that through regulation of breath, the veil covering the inner light is thinned. So you can think of it as this way. When the breath settles, the practice begins, and the next step is the mind is now ready to join in the practice. We go through the next limb, which is called Pratyahara, and that is the withdrawal of the senses. And that, to some ears, can sound severe. Patanjali does not mean that we shut the world out. He means it as a way of reclaiming attention, you see, because our senses are intended to go outward towards sound and towards movement and towards sensations. And truly, if left unchecked, they scatter the mind. So Pratyahara is about not being pulled by every signal. A simple example is you're lying still, a sound happens, whether it's a door or a cough or a car outside, and instead of following it and building like a whole story around it, you notice the sound and you let it pass. So the ear hears it, but the mind and the body, aren't going to chase it. So attention stays home. And that's not by force or avoidance. It's just you're not going out after everything. So the eyes can see without grabbing and the ears can hear without following. Sensation will still arise, but attention no longer rushes towards it. So Patanjali says the senses withdraw from their objects and follow the nature of the mind. So Pratyahara is that bridge from the outer practice to the inner practice. When attention stops leaking outward, the mind becomes available to be placed somewhere very deliberately. And that's where the next limb begins. So good news, the attention's no longer scattered, and it's now become possible to place it somewhere. And this limb is called Dharana, and that means basically concentration, one pointed attention. So no zoning out or daydreaming or drifting. We're choosing one thing and we're staying with it, you see, because the mind left alone will jump constantly. It'll jump from thought to memory, sensation, from worry, what's just happened, what might happen next. So Dharana is the practice of interrupting that habit. A simple example would be when you place your attention on the breath, and that's not the idea of breathing, but that's the actual sensation of air moving in and moving out. You see, a thought will still appear, but instead of following it, you simply notice it and you return to the breath. So again and again, this will happen. And that returning is the practice. So Dharana isn't about having no thoughts. It's about not being pulled by every one. So over time, attention strengthens. It's like a muscle, like a light beam that no longer scatters. Patanjali says, Dharana is the binding of attention to one place. When attention can stay without strain and without force, it very naturally deepens. And when it deepens, something shifts. And that shift leads us to the next limb. At this point, things have softened. And so we have truly moved into the seventh limb, Dhyana meditation. And attention no longer has to be dragged back. It stays on its own. So prior, we were resting in the breath, but as we noticed thoughts, we had to keep coming back, And at a certain point, though, our thoughts have really begun to soften. They're no longer affecting us. Our awareness is there, the breath is there, but there's not this commentary. And that is because we've moved into Dhyana. Our thoughts no longer interrupt the flow of our attention. It's unbroken and unforced. Patanjali describes it as Dhyana as the continuous flow of awareness towards the object. So you might think of it as this, there's still a meditator and there's still an object of meditation, but the space between them has thinned, effort has faded, presence has deepened, the subtle separation has begun to dissolve. And I'm just going to say it's begun to dissolve. So that's it. When the attention no longer needs adjusting, that's the eighth limb. The practice has completed itself. And awareness is resting so fully that effort falls away. So you see, earlier there was work. There was a steadying of the body, a settling of the breath, a gathering of the senses, a placing of attention. But now attention stays on its own. So you're sitting, there's breath, there's sounds, sensations are present, but there's no managing. You don't have to manage anything. There's no commentary running alongside. Awareness is there, presence is there, but you don't feel the separation. Patanjali describes it as when awareness rests in the object alone, as if the self were transparent. That is Samadhi. So nothing special needs to happen. Nothing needs to be added. The body is steady. The mind is clear. Experience and experiencer are one, or perhaps I should say they're experienced as one. And this is where the eight limbs lead. They don't lead us away from life, but deeply into it.